Welcome everybody to tonight's Jupiter and Gemini Zoom webinar. And this is Media Monk, and we're glad to have you with us tonight. Kim's done a lot of work and research, and I'm going to turn it over to her to do the presentation. And we are happy to have you join us. All right. Turn it over to you, Kim.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our Jupiter in Gemini webinar. And for those of you who tried to connect last week, we really thank you for showing up again. This is the first time that Leroy and I have produced our own webinar on Zoom. We've just switched from a format that we used to use before. And you can see on your screen, Jupiter is going to be in Gemini from May 25th through June 9th of 25. So we are recording this on May 29th, just a couple of days after Jupiter ingressed into Gemini. And I'm going to tell you a joke about this redo that we're having right now. Hold on. Anyway, one of my jokes. There we go. I've got a couple of housekeeping slides for you. And this has been in my head all week, Leroy. Well, everybody, last week, when we attempted our first Zoom webinar together, I wanted to fire my IT guy. And he so much wanted to be fired. However, that is not possible in our world because we live together, work together, eat together, do just about everything together. And after everything was done, he kind of admitted, I'd never been on a Zoom webinar before, Kim. And I go, oh man, I kind of knew it. And by the way, in case you don't know this, and it doesn't even have to be funny for you, it was for me. I married a third house Pluto, or an EA language. I married a Gemini soul. And so for those of you who interact with Leroy in different ways, he is the epitome of all that Gemini nature. And it works very well for me because I'm a little more fixed in nature. So I appreciate all his flexibility, adaptability, and the way he's willing to learn something new. Thank you, Leroy. You can see what we offer here on EAN. I use this housekeeping screen a lot. There are hyperlinks here that you, I think, will be able to click on or maybe copy and paste. We're planning to put this on our YouTube channel. So we'll find out. That's another new one for us. Of course, materials, we're going to offer you a discount on the materials. Anybody watching it live, showing up in the next 2 weeks. And you have to use the coupon code Europa if you would like to be purchasing any of our materials. And then here's the Grading Decade workshop that I did, 6 hours that we were talking about before. We have 4 outer planets, I include Chiron, that are changing signs in their long transits, basically in a 4-year time period. As I said before the recording, just that alone, 4 outer planets changing signs in 4 years, that alone tells you just how much change we're going to have at this point on during this decade on the planet. So if you're interested, you can look at this material and see what you can learn new for your own world. All right, so here is Jupiter in Gemini, and I had a week to review the material, and this was a little ironic. I hope you'll let me be personal for a moment. And I'm gonna forget what that one was. 2012. Oh, the last Jupiter retro or the last Jupiter cycle. Leroy and I first started doing webinars. The cycle before that was when I started my energetic balancing work. If you guys are familiar with that, I have Gemini on my 5th house cusp of creativity. Let me see, the cycle before that, I got involved in environmental politics for a couple of years, and the cycle before that, this is when I had my first marriage, which lasted about 6 years. And I even remember this date very, very well because we had a horrific snowstorm with my parents when I was about 9, 10 years old, and the snow piled so high on the prairie in eastern South Dakota that you couldn't, it was about 10, 12 feet high. You couldn't see, even when we were in dad's tractor, and dad had to take my sister and I a mile down the dirt road, gravel road, to get to the highway so the school bus could pick us up. It got so bad that the snowplows started skipping the roads and going through the fields. So I was amazed that I could come up with distinct memories of the last time Jupiter was in Gemini in my fifth house. Ooh, who put that little, oh, I'm maybe you guys aren't seeing, I'm seeing some ink, but I'll let it go. Sorry, Jupiter and Gemini, I'll try not to be distracted. So briefly, the Jupiter archetype. In EA, the planet, the sign, and the house are one archetype. They're an interchangeable archetype. Jeffrey Green always used to say, if you learn the 12 archetypes, then you can extrapolate them into planet signs and houses and reblend them together however you have to. So in this case, Jupiter, Sagittarius in the ninth house is one archetype in evolutionary astrology. This archetype, principle of our right brain, intuition or sixth sense, it's the principle of assimilation and integration. How well can we take it in and integrate what it all means? It is the principle of timeless universal truths, spiritual understandings. EA many times calls this natural law. And from EA's perspective, the fundamental laws and principles in the universe are the same for all individuals, cultures, countries. And yet, we conceive, conceptualize, express them in a diversity of cultural and individual ways. Most common Jupiter as conscious beliefs are religious systems, are human-made religious systems and dogmas. And so this will represent the belief systems that we are born into, that we are searching for, and that we are evolving through with our experiences in any given lifetime. It is the co-principle of language with Mercury. The Jupiter side is conceptual thought. I know it. It has to be then expressed through words we can all understand. And language is different in the East, where they work with concepts better. Think of your Chinese and Japanese hieroglyphs, I think they're called, whatever it is, versus Western language, where it's facts and details and objects. By the way, if you come up with any questions, you can type them into the chat pane. Leroy will answer back to you. If he doesn't know, he'll interrupt me. And if you really want to interrupt me, you can ask him if you can unmute and speak. I think he's controlling muting and unmuting. Again, we're on a practice mode here with our first Zoom webinar. So this Jupiter archetype, it's the principle of seeking knowledge through study, through experiences in life, and through travel. And it will bring up with this archetype a concept known as individual alienation and social alienation. And what that does is it helps us to eliminate any barriers to direct understandings of what we would know as natural spiritual laws and principles. And many times it will also happen through being confronted. We can be confronted with any archetype, even though Scorpio rules that word. We can have our bubbles of how we put our world together burst. And it exposes where we're limited and exposes where we've bought into a lie or an opinion. And it might be a version of truth for us, but it's not the whole truth. And so we go through this alienation to help us get to what is truth for us. And then from a broader level, what is universal truth. And when we don't stand in our truth, here's a good Jupiter Sag word: we compensate. Okay, I agree with what you say as being the be all end all truth for everything. When inside we're going, "Oh, I don't know if I agree with that, but I don't know if I want to stand up to them." And so it takes a little bit with this archetype to learn how to not only stand in our truth, but to speak our truth. And so again, what we do with this path is we progress from our personal truth to universal timeless truth. Now, this is also the archetype of experiencing visions of the future, and they may or may not be accurate. They may or may not come to pass. When we have those individual visions of the future, it can be a reflection of our own subconscious desires. And if it is, sometimes it can create a self-fulfilling prophecy, and we might slip into denying that we have anything to do with what is happening. In other words, we can almost wish something into being, and it may or may not happen. Okay. But the purpose of us having individual visions of the future is that we have a free choice to accept it and work to help it happen, to work to manifest it. Or if it's not what we want, we can make an effort to change and hopefully have it turn out in a different way. We also have visions on a collective or planetary basis. Think the Nostradamus archetype personality. Think Jeffrey Wolf Green, a very psychic visionary person, the creator of this methodology of astrology. Sometimes, again, we want to be a part of helping that manifest, or sometimes if we're made aware, like in Nostradamus's case, some of these collective visions of the future, humanity has free choice, and they can choose to go for it, or they can choose to not to. They can choose to evolve or devolve. That is the free choice we have with our human will. Now, I put this slide up, left brain versus right brain, in case we have some new people that find this tonight in the future. And it's like, wait a minute, I don't know what those two concepts mean. There you go. And there's your planetary rulers for them. Now, a little bit more in regards to this archetype and what EA calls natural spiritual principles. Many of our consensus human-made religions and religious conditionings teach us that God is the male, old man, white beard on a cloud. God is outside of us, judging us, and God is perfect. Well, why would something perfect create this mess? Very easy to understand our imperfections and to feel the guilt from the imperfection. And so we have two responses to that guilt. We can be the victim or masochist. This is guilt based upon atonement. I deserve this. I must be better. I deserve to be hurt. The other response is guilt based upon anger, the victor sadist. I'm going to get them. I'm going to hurt them before they can hurt me. How dare they judge me? If you're new to this concept, it can take a little bit of reflection to recognize this. You've been studying EA for a while. This is a big sigh of relief because it helps us judge less, discern more. So in natural law, which is always observed through nature, universal source is an energetic force beyond gender. Source is everywhere. It's inside us, outside us. We know it outside of ourselves to the degree we know it inside. I like to say that one-on-one journey that we all have to evolve our beliefs. And the biggie is that source is an evolving force. It's a co-creative process. Every time one of us makes a baby step forward, the universe moves forward. Gives us a lot of free choice and a lot of free will. And for me, with all of my Sagittarius ninth house archetypes in my chart, it gave me a lot of relief. Oh, okay. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm just human. I make mistakes. I have a choice to have a consequence, to make a better choice, to have a better consequence. Make a choice to have an experience, to make a choice to have a better experience. A lot easier that way. Jupiter you know, it's one of the things, Jupiter's growth and expansion. And so one of the distortions of Jupiter is taking everything to excess and extreme, whether it's good or bad. And I always tell people, whenever you have Jupiter aspecting other planets in your chart, know that Jupiter is going to expand it. It's going to sometimes go overboard with it. And if you can start to be aware of that, you can calm down some of this expansive Jupiter energy that we sometimes have. Just a moment here to let you know that we've only been 2 years into this new 12-year Jupiter cycle through the zodiac. And so it was back in May of 22 that we initiated a brand new 12-year cycle to grow, integrate, expand our social awareness, evolve our belief systems. And this was happening, especially around the world, but in the United States, both progressive and conservative beliefs and thoughts have come forth with a brand new 12-year cycle. More on this in a little bit. But I also want to point out that Jupiter's relationship to the 5 outer planets, including Chiron, one more separate 4-year fact for you. In 4 years, from 2020 to 2024, Jupiter's made a conjunction to each of the 5 outer planets and initiated new cycles with them in addition to its own new cycle. So just think about that for a minute with the concept of Jupiter and Gemini and the curiosity and expansiveness of Gemini. Jupiter's not just doing it on its own, it's also doing it with all of the outer planets. Grow, 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 change, change, change. How much can we take in with Gemini before we have to slow down and make sense of it all? More on that in a little bit. Here's the ingress chart, which happened May 25th, last week, 7:15 p.m. Washington, D.C. is where I like to do my charts. And I also like to do 0 degrees risings because it gives us the signs in their natural houses, and it allows any of us anywhere in the world to have a natural reflection on the archetypes and the aspects. But here we are on May 29th recording, and here's the list of all the activity that's going on here right now. I remember this Sun-Venus conjunction a little over a week ago, and Leroy and I were going, oh God, I'm feeling it already. I'm feeling it already. And it's like, well, honey, guess what? Here we are with these inner conjunctions. The ingress, I included Jupiter's conjunction to Uranus because it happened so recently. We'll talk about this one in a little bit, but look right here on this new moon and all of the Gemini activity and the exterior conjunction of Sun Venus, one of the Venus star points that's going to now be in Gemini if you follow along with that. You can see that the biggest thing we have here is the Gemini stellium trine Pluto. Massive increases in misinformation, news cycles, AI, artificial intelligence, increasingly in our lives, laws and legal decisions, Jupiter, Sag, ninth house ruled, maybe conflicting, confusing. Is it this or is it that? The duality of air, brain switching. This is a real biggie between Gemini and Sagittarius, switching between left brain logic, right brain intuition, going back and forth and back and forth. Are we going to get confused yet? Life itself can appear to be speeding up with these air signs and seem chaotic and unbalanced. So it can be very important that we prioritize time to slow down and breathe, pace oneself, ask for inner guidance. I think Leroy and I have been going back and forth on this one for a week when we had a whole bunch of family in town last weekend and we hosted mom's 91st birthday party for Leroy's family. I'm starting to breathe a little bit now. We also still have that Aries stellium. And again, I'm just highlighting things can lend itself to violence. So it'll be very important to find a sense of balance between ourselves and others. This is me. I get to be me. You are you. You get to be you. Your freedom ends at my nose and my freedom ends at your nose. Can we agree to disagree if we need to with all this air energy? This is the flavor for the next year of Jupiter and Gemini. So you can check into these every once in a while if you would want to. Now, Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury, Gemini, third house. This is the outer side of Mercury, and it's outer because it's active polarity. Gemini, third house is energy moving outward, and so is Sagittarius in the ninth house. So we have a double whammy of energy moving out from the center, active polarity, active, passive through the 12 archetypes. That alone excites things up, makes things seem to happen a little faster than we want to. But Jupiter is also transiting its polar opposite archetype. Mercury, Gemini, left brain, conscious mind. Jupiter, Sag, right brain, conscious mind. Now, this is known as the most interesting transit for Jupiter. When any planet is transiting its opposite sign of rulership, I call it interesting because its whole intent with that opposition is to bring us objectivity. If we're open to it, great. If we're not so open to it, can create a little defense, which I'll talk about in a moment. But what's interesting when Jupiter or any slow moving planet, well, especially Jupiter, but it can happen with Uranus as well. It can happen with Mercury and Sag. We get what we call this brain switching, which is where the conscious mind bounces back and forth between logic and intuition and logic and intuition. And oh my gosh, I'm getting confused. I don't know how to make sense of anything. And when that happens, we have really got to, again, slow down, take some deep breaths. Take a walk around your yard, get out into nature, get on your bicycle and pedal away, however you need to work in calming yourself down, even meditation if you feel so inclined. But again, here, this lesson then is to trust expansion of information, intuition, and larger understandings of what is truth for us and what our belief systems are. It is evolving, it is changing. And if we will slow down every so often and let Jupiter take a breath, things will click into place. And then the larger picture will click into place. And then the details can fall together and make sense again. So it will go chaos, makes sense. Chaos, makes sense. And by the way, I like to do deep psychology and EA. I don't really like the word predict, although I'll go through Jupiter and Gemini aspects, and I have a few comments in the forecasting area for you. One of the distortion tendencies of Jupiter and Gemini is the need to control the details, especially if life is changing fast. Well, I want to control those details in order to make sense of myself, in order to feel okay, in order to feel safe, in order to feel like I can live through this life. And what will happen then is we'll latch on to a specific fact, opinion, situation, point of view, belief, and we defend it at all costs. My way or the highway. I'm right, you're wrong. When that happens and we come too attached to a certain way of looking at things or opining something, then sooner or later we're going to have an involution, a collapsing inward. This is because Jupiter's a mutable modality, Gemini's a mutable modality, and mutable has to adapt, and it goes out, in, when it's a mutable modality. Again, the purpose here is to quiet our mind so that the broader picture can be revealed and we have a perception of what it all means. In other words, our own intuition, sixth sense, conscious beliefs are going to evolve, especially through Jupiter and Gemini, because Gemini says, well, what about that? What about that? What about that? If you learn basics of EA, Gemini will always poke a hole in a Sag philosophy. And it's because it's trying to get things to evolve, to adapt, mutable modality, to change. Evolution is the most basic law we have. The Jupiter's archetype, the Jupiter's archetype need to expand and grow can also mean that sometimes we're going to experience a loss or a disillusionment. In other words, we've got to open up the space for something to expand to. So something may be taken away. We can willingly let it go, and sometimes it just gets taken away from us. This is a natural part of the Jupiter Sag ninth house archetype. You've got to create space to expand into. The universe works in those cycles and rhythms. Expand, contract, expand, contract. Just understand that we will go through this again and again and again with Jupiter and Gemini. Now, Jupiter in Gemini, it just wants to create all kinds of new experiences in which we can expand ideas, conceptions, who or what we are, in relationship to our mental and physical environments. Gemini is mental, but Gemini is coming off of Taurus. And so we got to classify that physical world to make sense of it. And so that capacity to develop our mental left brain powers and our intellectual abilities to logically explain our universe, it's still going to happen through Jupiter and Gemini. So that process with Gemini of evolving names, classifications to objects and forms in the physical world, to understand it, know it, communicate it, again, it's going to happen with Jupiter and Gemini. And I put in the word AI for artificial intelligence. Just think of, and I got more explanations of what AI is for you and coming up in a couple of slides, okay? But just think about this whole concept. I mean, just look at how we've went from these tiny little flip phones to now we all have our smartphones that are basically our own carry around computers. And look at how many words we're exposed to in a day off of those smartphones. That is that Jupiter and Gemini process. So AI technology is going to continue to expand what we know. And Gemini is naturally curious on an intellectual level. It wants to learn. It wants to understand. And Jupiter in Gemini helps us understand it in larger and larger frameworks. And so from time to time, this whole artificial intelligence, we may individually and collectively have to step back from it and go, wait a minute, we as a group agreed that we like this, but we don't like that. Stay tuned. You know, probably most of us here are not really famous in the world like someone like Taylor Swift. Think of all the deep fakes that are going to come through. And how are we going to control that ethically with Jupiter and Gemini? Stay tuned. It's going to happen in multiple ways. And it will happen in ways that affect us individually as well, even though we're not being exposed to everybody out there. Hopefully not. But again, this natural curiosity, it's part of it's that polarity, Gemini Sag, defining ourselves and how we relate to the world. Jupiter in Gemini is simultaneously attracted and repelled by the desire for new information and experiences. And so it leads to choices. What information are we going to take in? And what information are we going to repel? And when we don't want to have a conversation about that person, don't want to look at that book, don't want to, take this into consideration. If we have defensiveness about learning new information, it doesn't mean we have to accept it or incorporate it, but can we entertain it? To the degree we are defensive, especially towards the past, this is what gives me security. I don't want to look at a new belief. I don't want somebody to say something I believe in isn't gospel. Then the degree that we are defensive towards our past or repelling new information will create the degree of upsets that we have in our world, and that degree of Jupiter alienations we will have with people, situations, and our place in the world. And again, that degree of defensiveness that we're going to have is the degree that we're going to have chaos and confusion through Jupiter and Gemini. And so it's going to expand what we know as personal truth. We all have something, more than one thing, that can be true for us, but it may not be true for the next person. Again, judge less, discern more. Virgo square to Gemini Sag here. Jupiter and Gemini wants to expand personal truth. It wants us to take those steps broader and broader and broader to universal truth. Now, it's going to then, throughout this next year, happens all the time with Jupiter, but it might be a little emphasized with Jupiter and Gemini. We're going to periodically be exposed to anywhere we have a limitation of personal truth, so that we can mutate it, so that we can realign ourselves more and more towards timeless spiritual principles that have always existed and always will, regardless of what we humans want to distort things into. In other words, one of the concepts of Gemini in general is that evolution demands our inner center must move. Our foundation is in movement itself. That's a Jeffrey Wolf Green quote for anybody who was born with Pluto in the third house, or the Pluto in Gemini generation, of which we don't have any of them living anymore. Don't think so anyway. They got to be really, really old. It's a Gemini quote. My foundation is in movement itself. You can repeat that one again and again and again through Jupiter and Gemini if you want to. And so as we broaden those cosmological understandings, then it allows us to have a foundation upon which to base our facts, so that our facts are lining up with truth instead of just being opinions or security, leanings. So it teaches us a connection between physical and metaphysical, between mind and intuition. And I put in here E equals MC squared, learning that energy and form are interchangeable. Energy is metaphysical, form is physical. You can't destroy energy, you just change its form. So this is something we will learn through Jupiter and Gemini, with all the AI coming in. So societies as a whole or collective, they may experience burnouts. In other words, too much social media, being bombarded with AI, and especially having it happen faster than we can make sense of it or regulate it. We may have religious and spiritual guilt trips that come up, especially if we want to leave a religious system and family doesn't like it and tries to convince us to stay in, for example. Our legal systems anywhere on the planet can go haywire. There can be political exposures. U.S. Supreme Court justices, one in particular, having a wife who flies a flag upside down, pointing towards the insurrectionists of January 6th. News media losing their truth versus lies grounding because they want to clickbait or ad dollars. We can have an increasing split of where we get our sources of news, conservative versus liberal, so to speak. And so even as a collective, society can be moving faster and expanding faster than we can integrate it in our lives as a collective. Can you see how that creates chaos? Can you see how that can create even more defensiveness? Ooh. Can we engage in societal walks? Can we engage in societal meditation or chai tea? Wouldn't it be nice if we taught all our kindergartners how to meditate? Might make a difference in a few years. We can also have nervous system burnout. Our left brain gets so confused. There's too much information. We can feel so wired because um, Gemini rules breath in, taking it in. Sagittarius rules breath out. They naturally rule meditation in it, along with the square to Pisces. But Gemini has co-rulership of the nervous system along with Aquarius, Uranus. And that's where that burnout can come in on a physical basis when too much is going on. And again, this is where we consciously want to turn inward, or whether we just got to check out from electronics and be out in nature. We've got to have time periods to just relax and rebalance, to be able to heal ourselves however it is that we need to. All right, I'm going to put my phone away after 6 p.m., after 8 p.m. How many of you look at your phone last thing before you go to sleep? Ooh, can you change that through Jupiter in Gemini? Guilty. I don't always read my phone all the way up to bed, but I have done it. And even myself, I've been thinking, oh, I think I'm going to work on putting my phone away and see how early I can put it away. I'm a readaholic, so that's kind of what I read. News, fiction, not a lot of nonfiction, but news and fiction, those are my two areas. All right, here's the Jupiter retrograde cycle that we're going to be looking at. And I want you to really look at these 4 months here. Jupiter's always retrograde for 10 degrees, and it's always retrograde on a 4-month period annually. And so look at this right here. From the beginning of October to the beginning of February, Jupiter is going to be retrograde in Gemini, and it's going to point towards its own sign, Sag. To me, this Jupiter retrograde cycle this year in the United States will be helpful in coming to the larger picture of what is really at stake here in our USA presidential election. More on that. Now, highlight of the retrograde cycle is going to be days after the election at 16 Sag, and that is always the highlight of any planetary retrograde cycle. The inner planets conjunct the sun, Mercury, Venus. The outer planets, Mars through Pluto, make oppositions to the sun. That's the aha moment of any retrograde cycle. Now, in case you're kind of new to astrology, why planetary retrogrades? They are geocentric or Earth-centered phenomena of apparent motion. If we watch the planet in the sky every night, it goes through the zodiac so far, and then it would retrograde or reverse back, and then it would make a third passage forward. It's always when they're closest. What retrogrades give us is an opportunity to break free from consensus conditioning patterns. Now, anytime you have a planetary retrograde, you got to relate it back to the natal planetary retrograde. So those 4 months I mentioned for Jupiter, relate it back to your Jupiter archetype by sign, by house, and by aspects in your own natal chart. And if you were born during a Jupiter retrograde cycle, then you'll have a temporary harmony during Jupiter's retrograde. Your intuition will be more in sync than Jupiter direct people will be when the planet is retrograde. Now, just a couple of slides here. When Jupiter's retrograde those 4 months, got to quiet our mind, make an effort to align with one philosophical, metaphysical system that makes sense to you on an instinctive gut level. It will help you get to the bottom line for yourself in your world, however anything is happening for you. And it also is a time period to recognize, again, your version of the truth is not the only version. Can we allow others their own path home? When we align ourselves with one philosophical system, we don't need to defend, we don't need to attack others, we can participate in learning, we can learn from others, others can learn from us, and oh, we all expand on the universe, in the universe. It also allows us to calm the mind and make considered responses instead of doing that Gemini. I'm just going to talk because I want to talk, and I might not say anything, but I'm going to talk and I don't want you to listen to what I'm going to say, even though I'm not making any sense and I'm not saying anything. I just want you to listen to me. So I got to talk and you got to listen, and da 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 da. Does that remind you of anybody we see in the news on a political level? So when do we speak and when do we listen? When are we quiet and allowing our intuition to really work so we know what aligns with us and what doesn't? How do we tell the difference between opinion versus fact? That will open up to us in this particular Jupiter retrograde. Now, put it on a little bit of the different evolutionary states for you. Consensus consciousness souls are going to gravitate to consensus opinions, ideas that they want to adopt as their own. In other words, they're going to go to more consensus forms of traditional religions and traditional philosophies. Individuated states of consciousness souls are going to gravitate towards creating their own philosophical system. This works for me. Or they're going to synthesize concepts from multiple systems while they reject what the consensus world says is right and wrong. Some individuated consciousness souls will gravitate towards one system they feel intuitively drawn to. And this means they are transitioning towards that spiritual state of consciousness. And they're recognizing that truth is to be realized, not created from an egocentric perspective. Spirituated consciousness souls are going to gravitate towards alignment with cosmological, metaphysical, philosophical systems on an intuitive basis. They're going to be based on timeless truth. They're going to be known through metaphor, parables, analogy. And we can still have limitations in consensus and spirituated belief systems if we get too judgmental and I'm right, you're wrong. Can we step back and allow others to have their own path, their own speed or lack of on what they are expanding into? I put this, oh, nope, I got one more, sorry. Spirituated consciousness recognizes the unity of all paths. When we're on that expanding evolutionary path, it will help us with natural communication skills, ability to understand connection between macrocosm, difference between truth and lies, able to translate facts and relate them to central principles. The intellect, Gemini, can identify the essence of any question, problem, issue, and intuitive solution to it. Okay, here's my slide to anybody who runs across this and you're beginners to evolutionary astrology. EA doesn't look at this expanding awareness of consciousness, our evolutionary states. We do not look at that as better than or less than. It's expansion of awareness, and we do it through lifetimes of experience. And your birth chart will not tell you what your evolutionary state is. No birth chart will say anybody's evolutionary state. It must be observed and correlated. This is a key phrase to EA. Observe, correlate, observe, correlate, observe, correlate. Don't ever prep a chart and assume, because that client will come in and teach you something new. Happens all the time. Even for me, 40 years into practicing with charts, it's like, oh, this is new. Oh, this is good. You know, and it really helps you. It really helps you relax your filters. Every astrologer has a filter. The soul comes through an ego. We all have our own filter when we look at any chart. And the more we can be open-minded about it, Gemini Sag, the more we learn. I like to joke, maybe I won't get Alzheimer's because I look at so many different charts in different ways and I learn something new every time. It's my Sudoku and crossword puzzles. Anyway, you by now have had a chance to look at this. 70% of people, any race, any country, any culture, our consensus. Astrology is the work of the devil. Take it for gospel. 20% of souls approximately. These are not cut and dried. They change through long eons of time. But approximately 2 out of 10 souls, 20% are learning to think for themselves. I'm going to discover and observe astrology for myself to see what I think about it. And approximately 10% of souls are spirituated. I'm leaving out the extremes on either side. That's a whole nother detailed area you can study with evolutionary astrology and learn more details. But I find this to be a very good visual for beginners. And if you're new to astrology in general and evolutionary astrology, and it's just light bulbs going off for you, be patient with yourself and really understanding this concept and being able to observe it and correlate it in someone's chart. Worry less about where their evolutionary state is and more about how can I reach them where they're at and help them go to the next awareness, the next expansion of consciousness, however it works for them. We can do that all the way through Jupiter and Gemini, and we can especially do it during this 4-month retrograde cycle. EA works with what we call the cycle of phases and aspects. We're always starting with the slower moving planet. That's the 0 point. And then we take the faster moving planet in a counterclockwise fashion and get that phase and aspect from 0 to 360. Dane Rudier, in his book, The Lunation Cycle, first brought up this concept with the sun and the moon, and Jeffrey Green expanded it to all planets and nodes and points in space. Briefly, you can start with the planet and you go in a clockwise fashion to find aspect phases and aspects to the nodes and points in space, ascendant, descendant, midheaven, nadir. Okay, this is very brief. You want to learn more details? I got hours of teaching this. By the way, our website at evolutionaryastrology.net, I have over 700 hours of webinar teachings. I'm like, whew, oh boy, I had no idea I had that much. Here's that retrograde cycle again. As you can see with your dates, you can see conjunction to conjunction, pre-shadow, post-shadow. I'm going to go through some of the aspects that Jupiter and Gemini are going to make. And I, first of all, am going to now introduce you to the astrology chart that I use for the USA. I ran across some articles by Michael Mancasey, and here is a PDF link for you if you want to read one of the, the article is a synopsis of a longer article of all the research he did with different dates and times. I kind of came to this because in 1989, the Library of Congress released newly discovered old letters of Benjamin Franklin and others, and multiple people quoting the signing of the Declaration of Independence between 9 and 11 a.m. And I like to say, it gives the USA a 5th house Pluto. No disrespect. I married a beautiful, wonderful, loving Pluto and Leo husband, okay? But have you ever seen a more egotistical, exceptional country, 5th house Pluto, than the USA on a collective level? And I thought, oh, and I kind of studied that. And there can be some elitism here with Aquarius, and that South Node is approaching that conjunction to Pluto here that relive, fruition, mixture of both that EA talks about when a planet is conjunct that south node. Little interesting. Probably the concept that you want to pay attention to the most with any July 4th chart is that there are 3 planetary aspects that really point to how the USA has swayed back and forth between inclusive, exclusive trends. It is the Mercury Pluto opposition, the only 2 retrograde planets. Many of you know we just had our Pluto returns. We can include the T-squared at Chiron. We're having our USA Chiron returns again this year. Are we going to continue to be wounded? Are we going to continue to be aggressors while we pretend we're not? We also have the Sun square to Saturn, which you can see right here in blue. And then we have the Mars square to Neptune, which is going to be very activated during this Jupiter and Gemini cycle. Here is the Sun-Jupiter opposition with the USA chart for 9:37 a.m. on July 4th. I could call it the Moncasi chart. Again, I told you, Jupiter opposes the Sun right after the December 5th election. We're going to have those results, but we're also going to be, after the election, in the midst of a Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, and that's going to be part of this Jupiter retrograde opposition that is going on here. Will truth prevail? Or will more people buy into lies? By the way, let me give you my filter here. I am not a fan of Donald Trump. And if you think Donald Trump, everything on the planet just lives and breathes by him, you probably need to stop listening to the webinar at this point. Just my filter, and I own it. So I got plenty of Sag 9th house in my chart, and I am, show me the truth, show me the truth, show me the truth. 66 years and counting, looking. The nodal axis is activated by the Mars-Venus opposition with Venus new phase to Pluto. And so I looked at this Venus-Mars opposition in Leo Aquarius on the nodal axis, and I go, oh, we're not done with being split between inclusive versus exclusive, liberal versus conservative, and there's conservative principles that are very inclusive. There are liberal principles that are exclusive. I do not mean to say these literally. Broaden your mind, Jupiter. But that Venus new phase conjunction to Pluto happening right after this opposition, what will be this vision of the country moving forward? What will be our values? If Donald Trump wins the election, we're not going to have much democracy. It's going to be, lambasted away however we can to keep the power and control of the consensus passed yesterday. Joe Biden is not perfect. And I'm just assuming those are going to be the 2 that are going to end up. Although I will say with Jupiter and Gemini, anything can happen between now and 5 months. Stay tuned. It's very hard to make predictions on who's going to win the election 5 months out. Who knows what's going to happen? But democracy will, for the most part, continue forward with this Venus-Pluto if we have a Democratic president. Regardless, however it goes, half of the country are going to feel very, very wounded with these Chiron returns that we have 3 times for the USA. And half of the country will be jubilant and celebrating. Who knows which half each of us will be on, but it's just going to continue with this. Again, I like to say inclusive, exclusive instead of, the liberal conservative. I like to say those terms because in natural law, from the perspective of EA, inclusive principles are giving, sharing, and including. Exclusive principles are taking, hoarding, and excluding. And we're the richest country on the earth, and we can't feed our children or give them universal pre-K. It's priorities. It's what our standards are. Let's see if those change with time. I'll try to get out of my politics here a little bit. So here's Jupiter, Pluto. Now, one of the things I did for you on these signs slides as we start going through them. Remember I said Jupiter had all these outer planet conjunctions in 4 years? Here they are up here for you on each screen. But here's the aspects that we are going through. We are just shy. We're in the orb of influence for Jupiter making a waxing trine to Pluto, one and only in Gemini Aquarius. If you are following any political news, you know that Donald Trump has just had his first criminal court case, the first time a US president has been indicted on a criminal basis. And it's possible that we could see the results of the jury deliberations coming through with this Jupiter trine to Pluto. I'm not making any predictions there. What were there? 40 counts of something. I guess I would kind of make it go, some of them guilty, some of them not guilty. Stay tuned, we shall see. But Jupiter is going to go into a sesquisquadrate or a sesquisquare phase, which is waxing. Sesquisquare is gibbous phase between the two of them. This phase manifestations must now be adjusted to equitable concepts, situations, and belief structures. There's a Capricorn control flavor to Jupiter's desire in leading these soul belief structures. In other words, Capricorn wants to defend consensus ideas. Jupiter and Gemini wants to really expand. How's that going to go with Pluto and Aquarius? Will we have a lot of freedoms, or will distortions want to limit freedoms to what worked yesterday? So I think it will continue to have us going back and forth in the split between majority public opinions on ideas and laws that restrict us. Just look at female reproductive rights. The majority on the planet in the US support some type of abortion autonomy and female autonomy, and yet we have politicians doing the opposite. Same thing with cannabis laws, same thing with voting rights. We're going to see, consensus takes a while to catch up to that sometimes individuating avant-garde. Stay tuned. This is going to be an adjustment period, gibbous phase between Jupiter and Pluto on how far we move and evolve consensus perspectives forward. So both of these archetypes are going to be in the duality of the air element. So again, those split understandings of reality, including detaching from what is real. It's already been going on, might be emphasized with Jupiter and Gemini. It may set up some trauma to get us to face reality in our world, individually, collectively. We can see an increase in mental disorders with Jupiter in Gemini, especially if we don't have some type of philosophical foundation to make sense of our world. So we can see more mental disorders in the news. This includes the experience of violent actions by those who may be mentally disturbed. We can see consensus society starting to recognize more mental disorders and go, wait a minute, what kind of people are we creating in our cultures? Maybe we'll actually have some reflection and discussion about it to maybe change a few things, maybe find more support for mental health here in the USA. We have the potential, especially between these two, to have some mental breakthroughs, two air signs. For instance, one example for you, the whole microdosing with organic, for example, mushroom, inorganic, LSD, substances for self-healing post-traumatic stress disorder. That can really come forth in the news and be understood, evolved, expanded with Jupiter and Gemini, and even with its relationship with Pluto and Aquarius, because Aquarius is so mental and Aquarius rules mental disorders. So Jupiter and Gemini is really going to want to help us move forward with our Pluto and Aquarius journey. I've created 4 words for Aquarius, especially Pluto and Aquarius. I didn't create the words. Sorry, that was a language misnomer. I put them together. Detachment, objectify, liberation, innovation. So activate them verbally. How can we detach from any situation? How can we objectify in our world? How can we liberate in our world? And how can we innovate in our world? I've been telling clients for a while now, here's your 4 Pluto and Aquarius words. Use them however you can. Share them with the world. So maybe all of us can have some evolution going forward. I also think because Jupiter Sag ninth rules teaching as well as preaching with, in a religious way, because it rules the world of teaching, that growth, expansion of knowledge. There will be AI technologies that can actually be of a benefit to allow more people to self-educate. In other words, we don't always have to maybe sit in the formal classroom. Maybe we can have certain children in, third world countries that get their own little, laptops that they can really learn to, do the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic for themselves. I'm not going to remember the source, but there is a gentleman down in the Southeast who has been adapting AI in teaching elementary kids now for a number of years. And he's been able to put it together enough that he now has software that teachers and schools can purchase and then adapt it to work for their culture or their state or their means of teaching, or adapt it for 3rd grade or 7th grade math, so to speak. So I think that one of the beneficial ways in which we'll see AI happen is through the ability to actually do the basics of teaching. Now, that's not to say that a religious school might not try to indoctrinate others even more. Yes, that can happen. But I think that there can be a benefit in that direction for it. Now, let me just take a moment for you with Pluto and Aquarius. And in case you haven't seen this slide, if you're a regular to my webinars, you're going to know this one. If you're not, this is something new. How do we know the difference between conventional versus quantum computing? Conventional computing is the calculator. I was a bookkeeper. I was left-handed. I could literally write and use my 10 key at the same time. Yeah, that left brain, right brain switching, so to speak. And so the calculators that we all used, and we still have them in our smartphones, but now we go like this. They're binary. They store and compute 1 or 0, 1 or 0 with little transistors and switches. And so we have these integrated circuit transistors, and we've made them as small as the laws of physics can make them. So now we're moving on to quantum physics, which is where we work with atoms and subatomic particles. And in quantum, we can store multiple values. We can store 1, 0, both, or anything in between. And so quantum mechanics with computers are allowing us to work parallel instead of serial. So imagine me with my pencil and my 10 key, and I can make 10 of myself, and all of us are working at the same time. That is quantum computing. And the example for this with quantum physics, which was a buzzword when Uranus and Neptune went through Aquarius, is that E equals mc squared. Light can be both the particle and the wave at the same time. It can be the energy or the form. And so this is the foundations of artificial intelligence, or AI. So we have computers now that can process things a zillion times faster than the human brain. Here are the 4 major types of artificial intelligence. That's not that there's more, that there cannot be more, but these are the 4 major ways. Machine learning, taking sample data and training computers to recognize patterns based on algorithms. Neural networks, computer systems designed to imitate the neurons in our brain. Natural languaging processing, the ability to understand speech, as well as understand and analyze documents. Now, in that one, there's a little thing in the news about Scarlett Johansson, who did some movie where she pretended to be a computer voice that a guy fell in love with. And she's saying, no, 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 your AI voice sounds that somebody created sounds too much like mine. Or think of authors like, Stephen King and I don't know, other famous authors that are saying, wait a minute, you can't take my books and make them into AI and take my type of writing and then what do you call it, plagiarize it. That all falls under that language processing. And then, of course, we have the whole area of robotics, which is where most of us think that the AI is. We're just really starting to recognize these two. But the robotics is that there's the machines that were, making all these machines that do things that humans won't do, which can take away some jobs. That's a whole nother subject. By the way, you can go to our website, evolutionaryastrology.net. And there are various different webinars that you can peruse, but you can also go to our YouTube channel, evolutionaryastrology.net. One of my favorites is the US public banking system. I'm a real advocate for public banking, and especially as automation goes through another wave of taking out a lot of our physical human jobs. So Jupiter going into Gemini in 2024, followed by Uranus going into Gemini in 25, is going to just accelerate this AI technology faster than we can almost make sense of it, including, expanding the chaos and the distortions and everything else. It's going to bring up science versus morality debates. That's a Jupiter and Gemini theme. Gemini can relate to the science and the facts and all the AI. Jupiter's morality and ethics. And so religion has a tendency to have a Saturnian reaction back to the past. Spirituality, Jupiter, must adapt to the evolving science of Uranus in Gemini and Pluto in Aquarius. I talked about this in the great decade ingress. We're going to have 5 Uranus in Gemini trines to Pluto in Aquarius, 26, 27, 28. Buckle up. I'm waiting for those flying cars so that maybe we can create them safer and they follow in these energetic lanes of traffic and we don't crash bang as we do on physical highways. That's one of my visions. I love this Dan Brown book, Origin. It's been out for a few years, but it'll also give you some basics on AI if you'd like to educate yourself. Jupiter, Neptune, they had one conjunction. They're going to move into one sextile in the crescent phase. It's a yin phase. Here we're going to deepen our inner reflections of evolving our belief systems. I like to say Jupiter, conscious beliefs, Neptune, deepest levels of unconscious beliefs. And they're going to make one sextile, and it can go by in a blink of an eye. We just had it. However, we still have choices we can make. Waxing sextiles are called choice points in EA. How do we want to choose to manifest at the first quarter square, the 90-degree mark? With Jupiter and Neptune, what we've got to be working with right now is what's possible to manifest and what's not. How do our value systems affect our physical and non-physical evolution? Jupiter was in Taurus, Neptune is still in Pisces. Humanity's belief systems, by necessity, are evolving to include the effects of climate change on all species. We're finishing up 7 years of Uranus and Taurus, the physical Earth. An EA will look at Pisces representing the totality of consciousness, all species, including the consciousness of planet Earth, which is the living, viable Gaia Earth, which will include climate change. And so we will actually start to, I have hope for the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction that happened in Pisces, that less and less of us think that we could have dominion over other species, which Christianity teaches. Can we learn the practical survival skills to become more conscious in our world? Jupiter finishing up a year in Taurus, Uranus finishing up 7 years. I think we're going to have increases in wind events, tornadoes, the direcos with the air element of Jupiter and Gemini. Again, all the confusion, whom do we believe in today's AI world with all of the deep fakes that go on? Jupiter Uranus had a conjunction, and they're now going to have a semi-sextile, although it's going to be a year from now. They're going to be in a new phase of their 14-year cycle, expanding an intuitive sense of our own self and awareness of the universe and how we create with the universe. There's going to be a Taurian flavor. I want my security. So we might have to watch backtracking with this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. I want to be secure. I want my, all my material goods when not everybody on the planet, can live like the US. But here again, another expansion of mental trauma, PTSD, all the neurosis, psychosis, etc. What tools are these two planets going to create to ground Taurus conjunction, our conscious, unconscious mind? And so here again, because technology can go so fast, we're going to get insecure. We may reject change, especially on that consensus world. I don't know if I can deal with all this Gemini diversity. I want to be secure. Just so you can see it, here was the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that we had back in April. We did have a very nice, their conjunction in the July 4th charts made a grand trine with the Neptune, Virgo, Pluto, Capricorn trine. So resource rewards or resource upsets. Are we going to go into excess resources? Donald Trump has said if he becomes president, it's going to be drill, baby, drill. And we're going to just, blah, 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 blah with resources, disregarding the climate. Individually, we'll see how each of these turn out for us. Collectively, again, stay tuned with this materialistic country. Are we going to support resources for all of us or just a few of us? Technological explosions, again, without any regard to how we are depleting resources. That South Node was having a conjunction to Saturn at the same time that Mercury and the North Node were coming upon Chiron, and all this was in orbs of squaring the USA sun. Include or exclude the immigrants, me Aries, us Libra. Not that's don't take that literal again. Again, I see it as continuing battles between conservative and progressive principles in all of that. Again, just a nutshell, not all of it. I do want to bring up one thing though with this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. sometimes it helps to have a little reflection as we look forward. Just in case you don't remember this, the last time Jupiter was conjunct Uranus, we had 3 of them in 2010, 11, Aries, Pisces, and we had the 2010 midterm elections, and we had the Tea Party backlash to Obamacare and the backlash to our first Black USA president. 2016, 17, we had their oppositions in Libra, Aries, and we were in post-election shock. I crochet my pink pussy hat. I know how to crochet. Others were elated. And so we elected a racial misogynistic president. And that's where we really started seeing the social media come through with the fake news, Uranus, Aries, initiating all kinds of technology. Just a little tidbit for you. Jupiter, Chiron, they had their conjunction last year once, 14 Aries, and you can see that they're going to move into the crescent phase together. Jupiter's going to make 3 waxing sextiles to Chiron. Again, crescent phase, yin phase, consolidate and internalize what we have been experienced in the new phase. All the new things, they have to be brought together to integrate. That's crescent phase. It's emphasized with Jupiter. Waxing sextile, choice points for self-healing, collective healing. Which groups decide to join together or choose separation? Again, examples in the US are post-pandemic states taking away Medicaid for those who are poor, especially young children, putting children back into poverty. Or are we going to find, Gemini, new and different ways to help people with their health, with their healing? We're going to be going through USA Chiron returns, 3 of them this year. And so that with Jupiter on the natal US Mars, include, exclude. What are we going to do? If we're feeling lost or victimized or angry, we're going to go, nope, 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 me versus you. If we're open to that expansion, we can go, I got an idea. Here's what we can do to help feed our children. Stay tuned. When it comes to the whole world of medicine, and I don't relate medicine, it's in all of the planetary archetypes, but I will touch upon it with Chiron many times. Are we going to, create more regulations? Are we going to try to regulate, the abortion pill or the birth control pill in the United States? Or is it going to be that we open up and learn more new things like Ozempic? Or more and more stuff starting to come out with Ozempic as people actually experience it more long-term, or stop because they can't afford it, etc. Just touching upon tidbits for you here. A lot to say in this webinar. Here's Jupiter, Saturn. This is what astrologers are talking about. I always use the minor aspects as much as the major ones. We're going to have Jupiter, Saturn first quarter squares. This is where we got the crises in action to manifest. So what are we going to manifest in regards to new societal ideas and understandings? Or are we going to try and reject manifesting them? No, I want to go back to yesterday so I can feel a little comfortable. Whereas Jupiter and Gemini are going, no, we're not. No, we're not. Many of you probably know in astrology that Jupiter and Saturn are the social planets. Jupiter expands, Saturn contracts. Together, they're a 20-year cycle of how we take our beliefs and put them into laws, norms, customs. And so the first quarter squares can be crises for us, because how are we going to move forward? And even though Saturn's not always the past, Saturn achieves goals, but it can lean towards it. And Jupiter's not always moving forward. but it does lean towards the future. And so they're in this push-pull together. So we go forward a little bit, we retreat a little bit, forward and retreat. And so how are things really going to come forth for us? In general, Jupiter and Gemini is going to want to say, let's go for it. And Saturn and Pisces is going to go, oh, but I want to feel safe and comfortable. And guess what, Saturn and Pisces, if it's not in your highest and best, it's just going to dissolve into nothingness. You know, we can have all over the planet societal crises, immigration, racism, refugees, with not only climate change, but war and our USA presidential election. You know, it's going to exacerbate social changes, but the global village and the broad spectrum is going to expand and readjust. It's just going to happen. More and more people, the world gets smaller and smaller. We have to figure out how to get along with each other. And bless all of you who have, been experiencing your weather events. It's kind of calmed down for us. I would like a little gentle rain, please. May you all be safe as we learn how to build structures called homes with just the changes that we are having with climate events. The United States happens to be in a geographical area that is very conducive to tornadoes. By the way, I've been through 2 tornadoes, okay? One in the tiny little bathroom of our old farmhouse when I was a little girl, and we went outside the next day and looked at things that were destroyed. The other one in the basement that wasn't so bad. I have very healthy respect for them. But just the increase in these wind events, these water events that are going to continue to go on. We in the US are, again, unique geographical area where they're just going to increase. So how are we going to deal with this with Jupiter and Saturn? And then, of course, they'll have all of their own challenges and confusions with AI. How can we advocate the beneficial uses? How can we regulate what are abuses of it? And we can go back and back and forth over that a little bit. And so the USA presidential election is going to be also very affected by Jupiter, Saturn, because here again, we're going to have the future of our democracy literally in a crisis and on the ballot. It's not just represented by our Pluto return, although that's the bottom line. You can also include the Neptune opposition in the natal USA chart, but Jupiter and Saturn brings it into consciousness. So are we going to choose autocracy or democracy? Remember I said that 4 months that Jupiter in Gemini is retrograde points towards Sagittarius, which is in the middle of the USA election, and it points towards being a little more philosophical and reflective. Let's hope. So how are we going to face the crises and how we want to participate in society and change ourselves and society? What issues are most important? How are we going to show up, participate, and help evolve the planet as well as ourselves? How are we going to take our own responsibility to new levels as we participate as a social being? Regardless of age, we're all going to be called upon to mature, Saturn, and innovate, Jupiter, Gemini, in new ways living on planet Earth. Here's the inner planets. I just put in the conjunctions, the oppositions, and the conjunctions for you. I do have a few little slides to show you. Again, here's that Mercury retrograde that's going to come right after the USA presidential election. And it's going to easily signify, the chaos, the claims of voter fraud, right, wrong, etc., especially if Donald Trump loses. Mercury, Jupiter are going to be in a mutual reception. And this Mercury retrograde, if you have not noticed, will take place all the way through. It will be, Mercury's retrograde will be contained within the Jupiter retrograde. They are going to be in mutual reception, transiting each other's sign of rulership. So chaos, excitability leading to impulsive actions, truth versus lies battles, misinformation, social media news, but also the potential to deepen our intuition, and actually balance left brain, right brain wholeness. This particular Mercury retrograde, I mean, it could, yes, it can create the chaos Mercury retrograde creates. It can create the technological upsets with phones and computers and, the washing machine not working. But I also think that these two planets can really bring deep, beautiful, intuitive insights to us and help us make sense of our world and help us make sense of how we want to go forward. For me, maybe for some of you, if Donald Trump wins, oh boy, it might be a little hard to do. If Joe Biden wins and it feels like we have more of a democracy in the country, it still will be, how do we move forward and protect it with laws? So we'll experience it personally. Many of us will experience it collectively. International listeners, thank you for my USA filter. All right. Again, I'm not seeing these two retrogrades necessarily in a negative light. I could be proved wrong if Donald Trump wins. Jupiter, Venus, there's going to be a T-square, and I'm going to show you this in just a moment. We're winding down here. T-square between Venus and Jupiter opposition with Neptune. Are we going to drink the Kool-Aid or really go for deeper understandings of democracy? Okay, here's some little tidbits for you. This comes recently from the Associated Press. The presidency in the US, economic statistics excluding COVID. Economic growth after inflation during Trump's presidency, 2.67%, Biden's 3.4%. This is Associated Press, which, by the way, before all of this left-right news, my early employment was as a bookkeeper in the newspaper world. I did bookkeeping before computers. I computerized bookkeeping for several businesses, 4 of them with newspapers. So I have a journalism background, even though I was the bookkeeper. Associated Press was who we went to for objective news before it expanded in all of this conservative liberal. I still have Associated Press app on my phone, and I still look to them for a viewpoint on things. If I say, okay, I want the neutral viewpoint. So they try to deal with facts and neutrality, in case you younger people didn't know that. Jobs during Trump's presidency, he added 6.7 million, Biden's added 15.4 million. Again, this is taking the pandemic out of it. Manufacturing jobs, Trump 461,000, Biden 773,000. And you're going, wait a minute, inflation. The low inflation during Trump's presidency was due to 3 things. This is, again, Associated Press. The legacy of the 2008 financial crises. None of the Republican Senate and House would do nothing to help Obama in trying to get past the great, what do they call it? The Great Regression, compared to what we did post pandemic. And so the second thing, Federal Reserve actions. They were deliberately keeping the borrowing rate low because they couldn't get jobs back up. They couldn't get the economy back up. And then the other thing that helped keep inflation low during the pandemic or during Trump's presidency was, of course, the pandemic. You saw that big dip and back up. So what really is driving inflation? And I'm, Venus, Jupiter here. They're two of our, resource signs. Here are the 2023 profits by company. You can look. Most of these are billions. I don't know if I got a million in there. I think they're all billion. Profits, not revenue, profits. And to give you an example here, Starbucks 24 billion profit in 2023. It could give its 400,000 employees almost $1,000 a month raise and still have 20 billion of it left over. Compare that with Walmart, 155 billion, Heinz, almost 9, Target, 25, Albertsons, 21. Those are our grocery stores in the US. And you wonder where inflation comes from. Corporate profits, they could get away with it. Mars, Jupiter, they're going into crescent phase from they're going to make a conjunction in August, excuse me, and then they're going to make it through that crescent phase with Jupiter while it's there. We're going to go into a Mars retrograde cycle here, the end of the year. I don't have the dates on the screen. Whoops, sorry, dropped something. Mars retrograde, December 6, 24 through February 24, 2025. Mars retrograde at 6 Leo, back to 17 Cancer. More on that later. Slow down. What do we really want in life? We might have some security needs because most of the rest of retrograde is going to go back into Cancer. And Cancer follows Gemini, and after all that Gemini curiosity and expansion, Cancer goes, oh, well, wait a minute. I got to feel safe. I got to be secure again. And so we might go through back and forth with that. More on this as it gets closer, but we can breathe deep. Jupiter and Gemini. Process the effects of any potential actions as best as you can, especially through Mars retrograde. Because if we let Gemini confusion come through, you might get a little frustrated and make impulsive actions. And Mars retrograde in general is learning to do considered actions versus impulsive acting. All right. A little bit on Trump and Joe Biden. Not too many more slides. How am I doing time-wise? Ooh, not too bad. I'll try and wind down here in the next few minutes. Here's the USA chart I use again. And as you can see, those 3 trends that I have for you. Here's what Jupiter is going to do to the USA chart. 3 conjunctions to Mars, 3 sextiles to Chiron, waxing sextiles, and 3 waning, let me see, I guess it's right, 3 waning trines to Saturn. So probably these Jupiter, Mars conjunctions in Gemini will kind of notice the most. My news, your news, liberal news, conservative news. This is truth. No, that's truth. That's a lie. No, that's a lie. Stay tuned. We'll see how all that comes along. Jupiter can help the natal USA with some of this healing modalities, perhaps moving them forward. And Jupiter, Saturn, well, we got them squaring in the sky, waning trine to the US natal Saturn. Are there areas where we're going to agree? Or are we going to continue with that split that we have going on so long? I used this slide before. I will probably use this slide all year long. When you start looking at the USA presidential election on November 5th, here's the major trends for Biden against Trump. In the last 8 years, between the first time Trump was elected, 2016 and 24, the USA will have created a net gain of 52 million Gen Z voters against older people. In other words, each year we're producing 32 million eligible new voters. That's not registered, eligible new voters. And we're losing 20 million older voters to death. This is coming from Celinda Lake, who is a long-term Democratic pollster. Most of these Gen Z voters are literally Pluto and Sagittarius, and they will represent 20% of eligible voters, eligible, not registered. They tend to vote politics over party. Most of them do vote Democratic. Now, the war between Israel and Palestine has really been mixing things up. And it's also been stirred up a lot by many. We'll see how all of that turns out. That's one of those areas that's going to make the youth vote a little unpredictable right now until it gets closer to election time. Stay tuned, we'll see. For Biden against Trump is the Electoral College. We're not a I can't remember the terms. We're not a one person, one vote democracy in the USA, in case you didn't know that internationally. We go by the Electoral College. Basically, well, I got one more slide showing you that. Only 11 states are really competitive anymore, 20% of the population. Here's the 11 states. This is how it's reduced the split, liberals versus conservatives in the US. Republicans have 208 electoral votes in 24 states. Democrats have 211 votes. Between 17 states and DC, there's a total of 538 electoral votes. You need 276 to win. What that means is that usually the majority of whoever in the presidential election, whoever wins the majority of votes in a state, their number of electoral votes based upon population goes towards that person. And so it takes 194,000 Wyoming people to get one electoral vote in their state. It takes 700,000 people in California to get one electoral vote. This is so unfair. And I'm hoping through the next year, next 20 years of Pluto and Aquarius, that we go to a direct democracy, one person, one vote. All you have to do is look at this, the fact that twice in recent history, last 16 years, Republicans lost the popular vote, but won the Electoral College and the presidency. I think in one Pluto cycle for the US, we've kind of outgrown this a little bit. Stay tuned. It might be one of the longer term changes that we're looking at. I have a tendency to draw up when the polls open in Washington, D.C. at 7 a.m. and when the polls close in Washington, D.C. at 7 p.m. Now, with the different time zones and different states have different times they open and close, it's all over the place. But I've went with the 7A, 7P in the last few presidential cycles and kind of worked with that. I'll show you another slide of the openings and closings in just a minute, but I want to show you, here's Donald Trump's chart with the polls closing. Let me do this for you. I think as I'm talking, I'm realizing I could have this different. Let me go this one. Here's the polls opening in Washington, D.C. at 7 a.m. We have, as I said, that Venus-Jupiter retrograde opposition with a T-square to Neptune. What are our values? What are we going to believe as facts, as truth, as lies, as opinions, etc.? Here's what happens 12 hours later when the polls close in Washington, D.C. The moon is going to move from late Sagittarius into early Capricorn, and the moon is going to form a T-square with the nodes, North Node Aries, South Node Libra. And we're going to have a Gemini rising when the polls close, with Jupiter right there at 20 degrees. I'll come back to this next one in a moment. Here's Donald Trump's chart, and I put in solar arcs and major progressions, and I put them in the chart like this so it could be as visible as possible. There's several things going on here. Most of us are realizing that Donald Trump's Gemini Sag oppositions with the nodal axis, okay, and Jupiter is going to go over the North Node in Uranus three times. It's going to oppose the Moon and South Node 3 times. I think this is the epitome of truth versus lies. You know, he told 34,000 lies when he was president last time for 4 years. Say this and do that. He's got all kinds of that going on in his chart. He also has this poles close with the moon in a square to the transiting nodes. They are exact on his Neptune and Eris. Here's the dates that the transiting north node goes over Eris, okay, and opposes Neptune, and same dates when the south node does the opposite. When I saw that on the poles closed, I know we have Pluto, you know, tail end of Capricorn, and it's got a lot of astrologers worried that we're going to go Capricornian reversing to, you know, conservative precedent, although Trump's not conservative. But I saw this moon square the nodes and I went, ooh, there's conflict with the public here. The moon is the public. The moon in mundane astrology is public opinion. And I'm wondering, and again, I'm forecasting, I'm wondering if as it gets closer and closer, that says the dementia, Jupiter and Gemini, remember those mental disorders? Does his dementia just keep coming out more and more? Well, people are going, ooh, ugh. You know, and I think I'm going to stay home. I just, you know, I can't vote for somebody with dementia. That was my initial thought when I saw the transiting nodes square the moon on this Eris Neptune. It could also signify, if he loses, the violence of the public not accepting it and going, I am really going to be violent. And there are literally presidential pollsters who are starting to say it's going to be violent, this election. It's going to be January 6th all over again. Stay tuned. In this right here, probably the biggest thing that's going on for Trump is literally on election day, solar arc Saturn. I've always used solar arcs. I use all 3 major methods of forecasting. Solar arc Saturn will be making a first quarter square to his natal Mercury. Exact. Solar arcs are a degree for a year. We move every planet 1 degree forward each year of your life. Direct on that by minute, and this is Saturn in Libra, and that's that split Saturn in Libra of what people, you know, think about him. You love him or you hate him for the most part. And, you know, again, Saturn square Mercury, it's kind of it gets a little harsh mentally. And it can be another indicator of, you know, some mental issues that may go on for him. Stay home, stay tuned. This is probably the biggest thing that we're going to see here is he going to continue to have an acceleration of mental decline? Who knows? who knows? You know, you can study this on your own if you want to. There's different ways of looking at charts. Here are the transits and the dates for Jupiter. It's going to oppose his moon 3 times, the emotions. It's going to conjunct his north node. If you're going to continue to get away with saying one thing and doing another, it's going to conjunct his Uranus. Uranus rules the brain, literally. It rules the synapses that go back and forth that helps us talk. It rules the dendrites where we store information and learn things. Is he going to progress or regress mentally? He does have trines to his natal Jupiter and his Chiron. That can be helpful. But I don't know. I wonder if Jupiter and Gemini is just gonna say, oh, you're not as sharp as you used to be, guy. Remember I said when the polls close on November 5th this year that we got this Gemini rising and Gemini retrograde? When I first saw that, I went, oh, crap. Don't tell me Donald Trump's gonna get elected. Here is the chart for November 3rd, 2020. Too small, can't see it. Polls closing, Washington, D.C., same rising within degrees with moon conjunct the north node in Gemini, and Joe Biden won. And I went, oh, okay, thank you, thank you, thank you. Last slide. Here's Joe Biden's chart, same thing, polls closing. You can look at the details as you want to as well. Here is the moon square the nodes. Guess what? That's transiting south nodes on his Neptune and the transiting north nodes on his Eris. They're not that far apart in age. It's not as wide of conjunctions, which is a little helpful. However, if Biden does pull it off, that moon is a pretty tight square to Eris. There's the violence again. Both charts are signifying the potential for violence. The biggest thing that's happening for Joe Biden is that over the course of this year, 2024, he's having Pluto and Aquarius make 3 last quarter squares to his moon in Taurus. Will the public budge, Taurus, on their perspectives of him? This signifies his issues with the public, even though so many of his economic statistics are better in a literal apples to apples sense when you compare that way. He does have Pluto making a waxing trine to Neptune. That can maybe counteract some things. He's got Neptune in that 10th in Libra. Maybe there will be enough that say, well, I do see him as a unifying force to help lead the country. Neptune Libra 10th. Oh, we shall see. Time will tell. I go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth over who's going to win the presidency. I did not bring up our minor third-party candidate charts. Plan to participate closer to the election with EA Zoom and a couple of other astrologers in forecasting. I put this in as a final slide for you because Jupiter says we're going to evolve with its conjunctions to these outer planets in 4 years. However, I am going to also, in addition to EA Zoom, participate in the Jeffrey Wolf Green Association of Evolutionary Astrologers online conference again in October. And my subject, somewhere between October 3rd and 6th, I'm speaking 1 month before the election. And my topic is specifically Pluto at 29 degrees Capricorn in the USA presidential election. If it warrants bringing in a third party or vice presidential charts, I will decide on that as it gets a little closer. All right, everyone, that's it. Thank you for letting me monologue through it. I hope it went okay with Leroy working the chat pane. Here are the next Zoom webinars that we are going to do. You are always welcome to go to our website and make a donation. I used to charge for my forecasting webinars. This is the first one that I am, pay it forward. Well, again, welcome to go to our website, make a donation. It's on our forecasting page where you find the new moon, full moon forecast. So any comments, questions? Leroy, he's new at at Zoom. You're welcome to unmute, let people raise their hands. Do I have questions? Do I have comments on anything? At this point, I may look at the chat pane.
Well,
When
a lot of comments, several comments. Thank you. Yeah, we've been chatting away on the board here with about a half a dozen of us, and while you're giving the information, particularly when it came to chai tea versus Tai Chi, we like that part a
did
lot.
I say chai tea?
And then I'm sure everybody enjoyed the little squiggly. You know, you're so Virgo-like and astute. We love the little squiggly sign down here when you put on your pen marker, your highlighter. You inadvertently hit the pencil and you scribbled it on there. I thought it was perfect. So thank you very much for making our Jupiter and Gemini night, Kim.
All right, all right. So any final call for questions or comments then?
Nope, we're
Kathy,
good.
you got it.
We
Okay.
love it. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, everyone. Enjoy yourself through Jupiter and Gemini, and remember, every so often, slow down, take a deep breath, and relax, and allow yourself to integrate everything that is coming at you in your world. May you all be safe and blessed. Thank you, everyone.